Hi, my name is Heather Hottenstein, and I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you so much for attending. I'm going to be discussing Verse On-Premise 2.0 and best practices around deploying it in your environment. First, a little bit about me. I'm coming to you today from Houston, Texas, and I have been working with Notes and Domino for over 26 years. I started right out of college in early 1994. Back then it was release 3.0, and since then I have just been in love with the product. Cannot say enough great things about it. And over those 26 years, I have focused mostly on the systems administration side. So notes deployments, notes upgrades, email migrations, integrations, and troubleshooting some really crazy server-side issues over the years has been what I've done. And I am very lucky this year and proud to be a member of the HCL Ambassador class. And fingers crossed, the announcements are coming out this week for who made it for next year. So I'm hopeful. And for the last 15 years, I've worked for RPR Wyatt. RPR Wyatt was a Lotus and then IBM and now HCL business partner. And we offer consulting services around Notes and Domino, both on application development and systems administration. And in addition, we build third-party tools that assist with the administration of the Domino environment. All right, so today specifically, I'm going to be giving you information on Verse. We're going to start out with an overview of Verse and what is it, and more importantly, why you should care about it. With the introduction of Verse 2.0 back in July, a lot of great features came out, and so I want to make sure that you're aware of those. And then we're going to move into how you can go about installing Verse, and then the best practices around managing Verse. And finally, give you some information on future plans. So Verse On-Premise was created by IBM several years ago, and it was originally done as part of their cloud offering. And it was built from the ground up. When IBM began building Verse, they didn't approach it as another email platform or client. They looked at it as a way for how people manage their work or need to manage their work. Because let's face it, email was not created to store knowledge, but in reality, it has become the killer knowledge management application. It's easy to use. People use it to share information, they use it to store their documents, and they just want to be able to quickly find the information that they need. And that's how Verse's user interface was developed. In addition, being that it's part of the collaboration suite, it also interacts with same time and connections. So ultimately, it's giving the user an easy way to search for their documents and, more importantly, search for the people that they need to work with. Now, technically on the back end, it is still the same mail.nsf that you have been using for as long as you've been using Notes and Domino. It's just a different interface that's served up through the web browser. So very similar to how you're using iNotes today. However, it's just a different URL and a different interface. And that mail file can be used in conjunction with the other ways that you're accessing your Notes mail file. For example, I can have one computer that's running the Notes client and has my mail file open. I can have a second computer with a web browser open and have iNotes open. I can have even a third computer with a browser open and have Verse On-Premise showing. And finally, I can have my mobile device that has Traveler on it, and I'm synchronizing my mail and using it on my device. Now, you probably are going, well, okay, I'm already using iNotes, so I'm giving my users browser access to their email. Why do I care? Why should I even think about putting Verse in my environment? Well, first of all, HCL has said that Verse is the future of email. That is where their focus is. And secondly, with Domino 11, there were no new features introduced with iNotes. It was just bug fixes. And definitively, when version 12 ships later this year, iNotes will be officially deprecated. And Verse will be the option that you need to use to provide your users email access through a web browser client. So as I said, back in July of this year, verse 2.0 was released, and it has a lot of awesome features. First of all, probably one of the most exciting ones that really cements it as a true solution is the fact that it now is available as a progressive web app. Also, something to be aware of, and this is a feature that was available before and that you could set on your server and give your users the option to use enhanced calendar options. But like I said, that was something that you had to set in the Notes INI. That is now set automatically by default for you. So as an administrator, if you want to remove enhanced calendar options, then you need to use this Notes INI feature of VOP G-key feature 168 and set it to a 0 value to remove it from your Domino server. Also, as I said, one of the benefits of Verse is its search capabilities. And they have now added the ability to search for information in your email based on date range. Also, at the time that you're sending a message, you also now can choose to file that message in a folder. And building in more parity with the Notes client is the ability to manage your mail rules. This one, from an administration perspective, is one of my favorites because it was frustrating when you wanted to do something with a mail rule, whether it was create it or modify it, and you had to fire up the Notes client to do it. So now within the Verse interface, you have the ability to manage your rules, manage how your email is when it's coming in and how it's handled. Also, from a mobile device perspective, when you are interacting with Verse, you can now do a refresh automatically, or you can do a refresh by using that drag down that you're used to using in other applications. And from a security perspective, we've had an improvement for when there's a session timeout, that reauthentication occurs through the browser page versus an iframe. And finally, following with regards to Microsoft's direction, where they are reducing Internet Explorer in favor of Edge, Internet Explorer is deprecated as a supported platform for Verse. Now, some other improvements for administrators is that, first of all, from a security perspective, you can give your users a get out of jail free card when launching attachments and links. And this is by setting what's known as 3 clicks. And it's done by setting the feature 217 equals 1 in your server's INI. What that functionality does is when within Verse, a user is attempting to launch an attachment or a web link, it's going to give them a pop-up and say, are you sure you really want to do this? Because as we all know, with phishing attacks, those attackers are being sneaky and they're trying to get the user to click on email attachments and links so that they can do some type of nefarious activity. So by doing this, I'll admit it, I get on autopilot, I'm opening emails, I'm clicking, and sometimes you just kind of lose track. Well, this is a way of refocusing the user and saying, hey, do you really want to do this? Also is the ability that when your users are doing things like looking at business cards and type ahead, they can now see the Notes name of that person. And that's done by implementing feature 206 equals 1 in your Notes INI. And then finally, the redirection database that's used for Verse authentication, that now has SAML authentication support. All right, so now we're going to talk about installing. How do you get Verse in your environment? So first of all, I do have to say that the documentation that is available on HCL's website is rock solid. You don't have to copy down this URL. You can either get my slide deck later, or if you just Google HCL Verse 2.0 install, you'll find the link within the first 1 or 2 options that come up. And by following this document step by step, you'll have Verse up and running in your environment in a very short period of time. Also, I want to note that the installation of Verse, or the software for Verse, is a separate download off of HCL's FlexNet website. And once you have that software, then you can go through the requirements list. And you want to make sure you carefully go through that checklist to make sure you have everything before you actually start doing the install on your Domino server. So the system requirements, they vary based on which version of Domino you're on. You want to make sure that you're on at least a minimum of Domino 901 Feature Pack 10. And the higher you are, the better. Also, look at with regards to your operating system and make sure that that underlying OS is supported with the version of Domino that you're running. Also, with regards to the mail template that those users are using for their mail files that are going to be serving up Verse, you need to ensure those mail files are at a minimum of the standard mail template that's shipped with Mail 9 Feature Pack 10, or Feature Pack 9, excuse me, or higher. So for example, if you've already gone to Domino 10 and you've moved all your users to Mail 10 standard mail template, then you're fine. However, if you're using something like an older template, you may have some users out there that they really loved the Mail 7 template, for example. You will need to upgrade them. Also, because I said this is a web browser, so it's serving up that traffic via HTTP. Well, that HTTP traffic has to be encrypted. So you need to go about obtaining that certificate so that you can serve up HTTPS. Also, within the server document, there's a change you need to ensure is there, and that is on the use UTF-8 out for output field, you want to change that value if needed. Also, the person documents, they need an internet address for the user, and because again, they're authenticating using the browser client, goes without saying, they need an internet password. The ID vault. This is something I actually talked about in my session yesterday, in that ID Vault is something that if you don't already have in your environment, you need to deploy it. First of all, it is a security best practice for Domino. It is a way of dynamically storing this Notes ID in a secure fashion. And secondly, as HCL is introducing new features into Domino, they are making a requirement to have the ID vault. And Verse on-premise is the same here. You need an ID vault. And as I said in the beginning of my presentation, is that Verse is a way for searching email messages. And so in order to search for those messages, you need to have the database full text indexed. That's the mail file, it needs to be full text indexed. And finally, on the Domino server, you need to have these two entries in your Notes INI where you're managing the JVM max heap size. So now that you've gone through your requirements and you have your software, you're ready to begin. For an environment or a Domino server that already had Verse installed, like for example, 109, you're going to need to first remove those Verse jar files. And depending on what version you installed, they're going to be located in one of two places. They'll either be in the Domino program directory, or they will be in the Domino data directory. And I do have the underlying folder structure listed for both directories. Once you've removed the jar files, then you're going to take the zip file that you downloaded from FlexNet and you're going to copy it to the Data Domino Workspace Applications folder. That's a really important step. I actually missed that in my last one. And I'm like, where are the files going? And had to read the document like 3 times so I figured it out. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to take that iWhereDir template that extracted to the applications folder and copy it to the Domino data folder. Now, if you already have deployed a previous mail redirection or web logon redirection using a previous iWhereDir.ntf, then you can just do a replace design at this point. However, if you have never deployed a mail redirection utility or a login redirection utility, excuse me, using the iWhereDir template, then you need to create a new database. But once you have that database either upgraded or now available, then you're going to open it. And on the UI setup page, you're going to modify it and enable Verse. At this point, the actual installation is complete. So you can go ahead and load HTTP on your Domino server at this point. Now, if you previously have installed Verse, then you do have your credential store already in place. If this is your first installation, now at this time, you're going to configure your credential store. And I know it sounds a little intimidating. You're like, how do I do that? Don't worry. That installation document has every step you need to follow. And I do want to make a special note here that if your Verse server is doing a mail cluster, so that means that you are providing your users that when they access their mail file, if their server is not available, they can fail over to a cluster mate and still access their email. There are special steps you need to follow, and those are also in that document. And now you're ready to test. From a web browser, you're going to enter a URL that you traditionally use to access your Domino server, except you're going to use a /verse. And hopefully, fingers crossed, that UI comes up. All right, so now moving into best practices about how you can ensure that your users are having an optimal experience. That server is performing in a fashion that is fast and efficient. And it's also secure, so you're avoiding any potential pitfalls with bad characters getting into your environment. When we think about managing that Domino server, of course, first of all, it is a Domino server. So everything that applies to managing notes in Domino is applicable. And then we also think about a mail server and how we effectively manage email. And finally, security. All of the security best practices that fall for Domino in email and networks, they are things to think about as well. So one of my favorite features or new features with Domino 10 is the enhancements to the Domino cluster. And if you haven't already implemented these on your Domino 10 or 11 server, I highly recommend them. Domino clusters now are self-healing, meaning they are truly symmetrical. In the past, as a Domino administrator, when you registered a user on server A, for example, you had to remember to put a replica of their mail file on server B, so that in the instance where server A wasn't available, they would fail over and still be able to access their email. Also, the servers could still deliver email to that individual. And also, as an administrator, you had to keep an eye on your databases to ensure that they were usable. So again, in the case where a failure event occurs and a user fails over, if that mail database has corruption, the user can't access it. It's unusable. So now with Domino cluster healing, the cluster takes care of that for you. It automatically is creating the new replicas, and it's automatically ensuring that those replicas are usable across the cluster. Also, there's internet clustering. Domino has the Internet Cluster Manager. It's something, it's been there for a while. You can use it. However, I have found over the years that most environments prefer to do something with regards on the network side, where either they do DNS round robin or they set up a load balancer appliance, and from the load balancer, they're redirecting traffic to the appropriate Domino servers in the back end that can serve up the mail. Something exciting that came about in Domino 9 is the ability to effectively and efficiently run maintenance against databases. Now, all of the tools that are available in database management and the database management tool have always been there, and they can be done by running several other utilities on your Domino server, either manually or through program documents or schedule tasks through the server's INI. However, by running DBMT either manually through a Domino console command line or through a program document, you're now getting one-stop shopping. It's running all of these utilities: copy style, compact, fixing up databases, purging out deletion stubs, removing soft deletes, a host of other things. But it's taking care of your databases and ensuring that they are functioning in an optimal fashion, and they don't have any corruption. What's been around for a really long time is transaction logging. And transaction logging is a way of actually improving the performance of your Domino server. With transaction logging now, changes to databases and documents aren't written directly to the database. They're written to the transaction log. and then the transaction log applies that to the database at the document level. So if you haven't already implemented transaction logging, it's something I highly recommend you look into. And then, of course, once you have transaction logging on that mail server, you can implement the Domino Attachment Object Service, also known as DAOS. And what DAOS provides you is the ability to store file attachments only one time. So, for example, if I send an email message to 10 people, and that email message contains a 10 megabyte file attachment, traditionally, that's going to take up 100 megabytes of total disk space on my Domino server because each mail file receives that document in whole. When DAOS is enabled, then what happens is that file attachment is actually stored at one place as an MLO object on disk, and each email message has a pointer to that MLO. Effectively, I have just reduced that footprint of the message by 90 megabytes. And for managing your web servers or your web server and the sites that are available on that server, consider using the Internet Site Documents. They make your life so much easier. And finally, in a way of providing business continuity and fault tolerance is VERSE High Availability that is coming in 201. So something to look at there. Now, when we think about the Domino server as a web server, we want to ensure it is optimally performing. So to help it run in a more efficient fashion, the first thing you can do is you can manage the number of active threads that are available. And that is done through the Server Documents Internet Protocols tab. And I know that, some people go, well, you know what? I'll just set this to a really high level because more is better. Well, this is actually one of those cases where less is better. You want to have enough, but you don't want to have too much because too much can actually decrease the performance of the Domino server. So fortunately, there's information in the statistics table that we can leverage to figure out what exactly this numbers needs to be. So by looking at the statistics table at the stats that I have listed here, for a Domino server that's just serving up to internet browsers, you want to use the first two and kind of average them together and set your number of active threads. Now, if you are also using Traveler, now for a large production environment, I wouldn't recommend having VERSE and Traveler on the same box. But if you're in a test environment, or if you're a small company and you only have, 10, 20 people, then you can do that. And so you want to be cognizant of what Traveler's requirements are. So for Traveler, you want to look at push devices total, take that value, multiply it by a factor of 1.2, and that is your number of active threads. Also in the Internet Protocols tab is a field called concurrent connections. And that is the number of maximum concurrent sessions that can be happening through HTTP. And you want to set that value to either the same or slightly greater than active threads. And then finally, persistent connections. You want to ensure that you set that to a disabled value because by default, it's enabled. Security. I could talk about security all day long, but powers that be tell me I have like 18 to 20 minutes to go. So I'm going to be a little concise here. First of all, it doesn't matter what application or system you're deploying. You need to think about where on the network it makes sense to put this. For those of us who have been around a really long time, or maybe have really small environments, we may be a little loosey-goosey and put those Domino servers outside of a firewall. Not a great best practice. So you want to make sure that you put your server behind your firewall. It's either sitting in a secure DMZ or it's sitting on your private network. And then you create the tunnels that need to exist in order to come in through your firewall, etc. Also, giving your users the ability to remotely access their email. It's almost a requirement in this day and age. You can't tell your users from outside the company when they're not in the office they can't access their email, especially now that we're in a COVID world. So you need to provide your users that remote access. That can be done securely through a VPN solution, or another option that you can have work is teach your users that if they have a mobile phone that's on their provider's network, when they want to use a Wi-Fi, or when they have the option of either doing a Wi-Fi or using their phone as a mobile hotspot, use the phone as a mobile hotspot. It's going to give them a little more security than a public Wi-Fi would. Also, Domino has a lot of configuration for security internally. And if you've inherited your Domino environment or you've been managing it for a while and you haven't given yourself a security audit, I suggest opening your server document and going to the security tab and looking at those fields individually to ensure that you are optimally securing your server. You know, first of all, I can't tell you how many times I look at a server document in a customer's environment, and for full access administrator, they have servers listed. Servers are not administrators. There is no reason to have a server listed there. If you see them there, remove them. Also, for full access administrator, you should only have a very few key people listed. For local domain admins, you could have more people, absolutely. But full access admin is a special privilege, and only a very few should have that ability. Also on the security tab, make sure that you have groups. You should not have individual names listed in those fields. Leverage group documents. And again, go against Google searches to read up on each of these fields and learn about them and set them appropriately. So only the people that actually need the rights have them. Mail forwarding. Our users can love to create mail rules, and they can create a mail rule to automatically forward email. Now, there is a business reason for this. You know, I receive an email message and I want it to automatically forward over to a colleague because either I don't do that job anymore or I want them to be aware of it. However, I don't want, as an administrator, my user automatically forwarding email messages out to the internet per se. I don't want it going to a gmail.com address. So by using automatic forwarding controls that are available in the configuration document, you can control what your users are forwarding or how your users are forwarding to what entity. I have seen a number of clients get clobbered with malware that has come in through an email message that was attached as either a zip file or an executable file. So to help prevent your users from causing problems in the environment, you can look at preventing zip and executable attachments from being delivered to your users. Something I recommend if you haven't already taken a look at it. Also for your Domino server that is doing connections and talking to other SMTP servers out in the wild, you want to ensure that you secure that traffic. And that is done by configuring TLS for SMTP on the Domino server. And for example, as we learned previously, for Verse, you need HTTPS. So you already have that certificate. At that point, to configure TLS for SMTP is less than 5 minutes of work in Domino. With regards to accessing mail files, I know that the practice in the past has been for the local domain admin group to be the ACL of the mail files. However, since full access admin has become more popular as a feature, I have moved towards the thought process of removing local domain admins from the ACL of the mail files, and instead, when an administrator needs to open a mail file, use the full access admin right by invoking it in the admin client. Because when you invoke full access admin, it's written out to the log NSF, and that becomes an audible event. And then finally, without saying, you need to have antivirus and anti-spam running against your mail, so that when email is coming into your environment, it's being scanned at some level, whether that's happening on an external device or it's happening on a program running under the umbrella of Domino. You need to be reviewing that email proactively before it hits the user's inbox so that you're ensured that what is getting to the end user has already been previewed and is considered safe, at least to the best of your ability. Also, with regards to the web browser, you want to set in your server's INI, HTTP disable methods equals trace. And what that's going to do is it's going to prevent cross-script attacks. And also, one that I like to recommend is the removing of web admin. Now, webadmin.nsf, it's kind of a cool database, and in theory, it's kind of nice, but a lot of admins don't use it. So if you're not using it, then go ahead and get rid of it. And the first time that I ever did this, I was like, okay, I brought my Domino server down for some maintenance, and I had in my, change control that I was going to be deleting webadmin.nsf, deleted the database, brought Domino back up, and a little bit later, I noticed the database had resurrected. It was a little ghost. It came back on me. I'm like, what the heck? Well, when HTTP loads on a Domino server, if you do not have Domino, no webadmin equals 1 setting your notes INI, it automatically creates a database. So set this value in your notes INI, and you will be assured that the database does not come back on you. Another key element with regards to controlling access to your environment is controlling the credentials. The credentials are the username and the respective password. So first of all, you want to ensure that you are securing the way those passwords are stored in the person documents. For those of you who have been around for a really long time, you may remember back in the early days, those were stored in clear text. So just by putting the person document into edit mode, you could get the internet password value for a particular individual. I mean, it's just so scary to think about that. But luckily, they introduced some hash algorithms. There was one initially that was good, but they improved it later on. So I recommend that you go to your Domino directory profile and set that to the highest value. Also, on the configuration document of your Domino server, you can configure internet password lockout. And by doing that, you are then preventing brute force attacks through password guessing. So you can say, for example, if someone tries to authenticate more than 5 times with the wrong password, then lock them out. And then on the server document, first of all, that security tab that I was talking about a little bit ago, there's an internet authentication field. And that is with regards to the number of allowable combinations of a user's name that are allowed. So by going with fewer names, you're reducing the number of acceptable usernames. Also, on that server document on the ports, internet ports tab, by default, those internet protocols do not respect the deny access list. That is set to no by default, and it has always been that way. So you need to make sure that enforced server access settings for all of those protocols that are defined. This is HTTP, it is LDAP, it is IMAP, etc. You want to make sure that is set to a yes value. And then also on the server document on the Internet Protocols tab, you want to set allow HTTP clients to browse databases to a no value, because by doing that, it prevents a web browser from actually bringing up a list of all of the databases that are available on the Domino server and start clicking around. And also on the Internet Protocols Domino Web Engine subtab, force logins on SSL to a yes value. You're ensuring that the credentials that are being passed back and forth during authentication time are done in a secure fashion. Also, on the security settings document that's available in the Domino directory, you can set up password requirements. Now, there's a lot of really cool options here. You can, have expirations, you can have what values you're requiring, but the downside, yes. I'm sorry, I was told to hold on a sec. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so as I was saying on that security document, server security or security settings document, there's a lot of really cool options with expiration and requirements for passwords, but the downside is they only apply for the Notes ID. So one of the things you can do is if you have a combination of Notes users that are also using the web browser is you can force the internet password to synchronize when a user changes their Note client's password. So by controlling the Notes client password, you're also then effectively controlling the internet password. Also, if you ever think your users have a compromised password from a web perspective, or you can also do expiration every couple of months, you can use off of the person document the action set password fields. And on the next successful web browser login, it will force the user to change their password before serving up the data to them. And then there's end user training. Now, I first of all tell your users what phishing is, train them on phishing, and to be vigilant. If an email message or that web link just looks funky, don't click it. And then finally, I like to teach users to use phrases instead of words for their passwords. Like, for example, I have here a password I used to use. It looks kind of like gibberish, but it's the phrase, I used to love him, but I had to kill him. And then Domino 11, it brings the ability to log in via the ID vault. This is something that you can set in your server document using your server configuration document, using the security tab. And when this is set, you have one of three options. The first one is the de facto authentication that's always occurred that goes against the person document. The second one is where you're only going to go against the Notes ID password for the ID that's stored in the ID vault. And the third one, thank you. And the first one is, or the third one, is where you have the best of both worlds. You have the ability to, where Domino is first going to check for the password stored on the ID in the ID vault. And if it's not found, then it's going to go fall back to the internet password that's stored in the person document. Also, a little bit of a login bonus information here. First of all, two-factor authentication. It has pretty much become a best practice for any platform that's sitting on, out there in the wild, whether you're logging into your bank or you're logging in, to another system that you need to access information. You want to set up two-factor authentication. And finally, with Domino 12, this is going to be a central feature of the Domino server. Now, until Domino 12 comes out later this year, or if you're running on a previous version of Domino and you don't have plans immediately going to Domino 12, then you need to look at a third-party solution. And I have one listed here that I have had good luck with. Now, for that mail server component of our Domino server, we need to think about how we manage email. And for managing email, first of all, you want to ensure that the mail.nsf database the user is using is running optimally. And yes, we have some users that are really good about deleting email when it comes in, but we have other users that are total pack rats. They may be because of their job. They are just required to keep their email. And so in order to keep the primary mail file functional in an optimal fashion, you can implement archive. Domino archiving has been around for a while, and it is rock solid. So if you don't already have an archive solution in place, I suggest that you look at creating one. So you take your mail in the primary mail NSF, and you're moving it into a secondary NSF file. The user can still access it. Excuse me. It's just not clogging up their primary mail file. Also is email retention rules. Depending on what line of business you're in and what government regulations you're under, you may be able to work with your executives and your general counsel to come up with a retention limit. And you can effectively say, you know what, any email that's greater than 5 years of age automatically gets purged out of your mail file. And once it becomes a company policy, your users have to follow it. Also, something to think about, again, what business you're in, what legal requirements you're under, what country you reside in. You have e-discoveries. And these are the legal audits that occur against your mail data. So you want to ensure that as an administrator, you have a tool set that allows you to extract that data and provide it in a functional manner to the parties that are requesting that data, whether they're lawyers, external government agencies, etc. And then journaling. Mail journaling is where when a mail message comes into the server, it creates a copy and it stores a copy, and it also delivers it to the intended recipients. But you have that secured copy of the message, again, available for auditing purposes. Domino does have a mail journaling solution. However, when you're trying to journal against all email that comes into your Domino server, that very quickly becomes an unusable solution. You need to look at a third-party option if you need to journal all of your email. Bulk sending, sales and marketing, they love to send emails to their clients. Well, the problem is when they're sending a large number of emails from your server and from your domain, very quickly gets you on blacklist and people think of you as a spammer. So encourage your sales and marketing team or any other groups in your organization, and they just send externally a large number of documents, to use a third-party solution. Some popular ones are SendGrid, Drip, or you can also look at using some type of digital workplace where instead of sending all of the content, you're simply sending out to your users or to your consumers an email that says, hey, click here to get to our information. And then finally, end user training. And, this is 2020. I am not saying you have your users come into a training center and say, this is how you send an email message, and this is how you delete an email message, etc. No, it's more about just giving your users some advanced features or ways of managing their email. Like, for example, introducing your users to the, forward with and without file attachments, or a new feature that came about in Domino 10 is the ability to reply or forward to an email using a secondary signature. So their primary signature that has all kinds of crazy stuff in it, a statement about an upcoming event and URLs to their Facebook or whatever, they don't need that on every email message they're sending. They can use a secondary signature. Some additional things that you can do in terms of managing verse. By default, your users can take verse offline. If for any type of security reason you don't want to allow that, then you can use feature 37 in your INI and set it to a 0 value so you stop the users from taking that verse data offline. Also, we have users that love to put these pretty pictures in their signature lines. Well, they look nice, but they clog networks, bandwidth when you're trying to transmit the message, and then it's storage on the other side of on the recipient side. So you can block that by using feature 176 equals 1. And then, as I said previously, part of the beauty of Verse is the way that it allows users to quickly find the people that they need to work with. And so for same-time integration and connections integration, you can add these respective INI parameters to the Domino server's INI and provide that functionality if you have same-time and connections in your environment. And then finally, just a little additional one, you have the ability to include box in the Verse experience. Now, for the future of Verse on-premise, like I said, it is what IBM or what HCL is looking at as being the client of the future. So they are developing it very rapidly, and they are interested in feedback. No, it is never intended to be 100% parity with what is available today through the Notes client. But they want to ensure that what is added is what people truly need to do their work and manage their work. So there's a survey on the internet that HCL has out there. Please go and take the survey, answer the questions. And also, if you haven't done it already, go to the Domino Product Ideas page or portal and browse around. I do this periodically. I go and I read, and if I like something, I vote for it. And as I think of new things that the product should have, I go ahead and I create new ideas. So ultimately, the big takeaways for today is that if you don't already have Verse in your environment, start thinking about it, set it up, and you can very easily start playing with it, testing it, and then rolling it out as you want. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте, Хезер. Приветствую вас. Отлично выглядите.
Good evening, Heather. You look fine.
Thank you.
Да, мы переходим к последовательному переводу вопросов и ответов.
We switch to consecutive translation for Q&A session.
Спасибо вам большое за ваше выступление. Это уже вторая сессия ваша на нашем форуме.
Thank you for your presentation. It's your second session at our forum.
Yes,
И у
thank
нас
you.
есть вопрос от нашей аудитории.
We have a question from our audience.
Есть ли какой-то способ кастомизации verse on-premise?
Is there any way to customize verse on premise?
То есть добавлять какие-то пользовательские действия.
That is to add some users' actions or activities.
You know, that's a double-edged sword type of question.
Это обоюдоострый вопрос.
So ultimately, kind of like you always can say with these notes, NSF, and the notes databases, in that the templates that the vendor releases, whether it was Lotus, IBM, or HCL, you shouldn't really modify them, but everyone does modify them. And with verse on premise,
Please
it is code.
Break.
Oh, sure.
Значит, коротко, что касается шаблонов, которые выпускает IBM или HCL, то их никогда нельзя модифицировать. А что касается verse on premise.
So with regards to verse on premise and making changes, it is underlying code. And if you have the knowledge, you could probably make some changes, but I don't know if I would necessarily recommend that. So that is something that I would recommend looking at what's available in the HCL ideas portal. And if there's not already ideas in there for modifying the user interface, giving the administrator or the organization those types of options.
Pause.
Okay.
Translation?
Ну, коротко, если есть встроенный код, если вы знаете, то можно попробовать модифицировать, хотя это не рекомендуется.
So if those options are not already available through or in the HCL Domino Ideas portal, then go ahead and submit those as future requests, and of course use the survey.
Можно обратиться к порталу новых идей HCL и поискать там, если такой вариант не рассматривался, можно подкинуть это как идею на будущее.
Спасибо вам большое за ответ.
Thank you for your answer.
Или, может быть, вы что-то еще хотите сказать?
Maybe you want to add something?
No, I'm all good.
Нет, все.
Хорошо. Еще раз благодарю вас за выступление. Мы с вами не прощаемся.
Thanks again for your presentation. We do not say goodbye.
Да. Okay. Мы еще встретимся на этом форуме.
We'll meet at this forum again.
Yes.
Хорошего вам дня, хорошего настроения, и всех наших участников просим присоединиться к следующей сессии.
I will wish you a very nice evening and good mood, and we invite all our participants to join us at our next session.
Thank you. Bye.